Well, this is my first sermon since my resignation was announced 10 days ago. I'll be leaving this community that I came to out of seminary, newly ordained, and who has become the community I love and who's for me and who's loved me for over 18 years now. After the inner struggle and discernment to come to this decision, I'm feeling grounded in a sense of it being the right time and a good and faithful decision. I had thought that the next big thing in life for me would be retirement, but I realise I want to continue in parish ministry, but perhaps at a few less hours, part-time, do a better job of self-care. It was in 1990 when Paula and I, my husband, discerned we wanted to come to study in the United States. Paul was already practicing as an Anglican priest in Australia and wanted to do a doctorate in pastoral care, which was not available to him in Australia. I was a community health, community development type person and felt a call to full-time work in the church. At the time, we didn't ordain women in Australia, but I wasn't even clear if that's what I wanted. What I really wanted to do was study theology. The idea of packing up and moving to the United States to study without a source of income seemed overwhelming to me and impossible. And as we tried to make it all come together over the next few years. To bankers, us asking for an equity loan so that we could go study in America seemed absurd to them. I remember one time after being turned down of sitting and trying to think and pray this all through. Well, at the time, the only sense I had was there's this big pitch black chasm ahead of me, and I felt if I took a step forward into the future, I would fall into nothingness. Then, on a Saturday night in 1993, while I was away at a catechumenate conference, Paul was back at the parish, we both had an experience. For me, mine was in a dream. For Paul, I think it was more a sense on awaking. But we both heard the words, risk all. Risk all. Somehow the lights within us went on, we had renewed commitment, and we challenged a few more bank managers. And one said yes. And so, through all sorts of serendipitous happenings and the prevenient grace of God, Paul got into 2 universities, we chose Emory, and arrived on a plane on August the 4th, 1994, looking to 3 or 4 years of study. We gained not just the identities as middle-aged students wearing backpacks, but identities as alien residents, foreigners, migrants. Obviously, there's more to the story now that we're still here 25 years later, and a doctorate takes more than 4 years. It's in the fine print, I guess. However, the experience of leaving home to live in another land has been stirred up for me today by reading the prophet Jeremiah's letter to the Jerusalemites who were in exile in Babylon. These people had been dragged off after the conquering of Jerusalem. They were in exile in deep grief and disorientation, and had recently been reassured by a certain false prophet to just cheer up, as God would have them back home within 2 years. Jeremiah's letter, however, to them was much more sobering and was speaking the voice of God, speaking into the situation and speaking truth. The letter, in essence, is saying that the return date for them is unknown, and in the meantime, in exile, they are to build houses and gardens and to marry and have children and grandchildren. They are to be in relationship with their neighbours who were their enemies, and to work towards the welfare of the city, for their welfare was to be founded in the city's welfare. In the end, it was 50 years before the descendants of these exiles returned home. These Jerusalemites have become exiles, barred from their own country, foreigners, resident aliens and refugees in a strange land have become their new identities. And many in this parish in close relationship with refugees in exile from their own countries, not for legal or punitive reasons, but mostly because of wars or prejudice or famines. In a theological sense, all of us can experience a sense of being sent away by God, sent away from home unwillingly. All of us can experience in some way finding our place in a foreign, our place in a foreign land. Like many others, Paul and I chose to migrate to America, but at the same time, we experienced many of the same things that refugees and other migrants do. The week before the Emory semester started, in fall of '94, at an orientation session, the presenter told us that it takes about 18 months as an international person to move from feeling very much an outsider in the culture to one of being part of the culture. I remember that first year or so just sitting and watching Americans, how Americans eat, how they dress, how they have whole stores just for dog food and you can take your dog there. I remember observing all the different subcultures that were part of this big culture. How Baptists were different to Methodists. How there was high Anglican and low Anglican in the Anglican Church. How there were all these little subgroups in the LGBTQ communities. How there were Latino communities and African American communities. One day I was asked to bring a salad to a community event amongst the other theology students. Now I had seen that Americans call salads that have either beans or pasta in them, and some salads in America even have Jell-O and marshmallows. I panicked. a salad in Australia was lettuce and maybe tomatoes and cucumber. But so it was, over time, I moved from feeling like an outsider to belonging. Although, as it's turned out, my accent is always going to give me away. It took much more than 18 months to move from feeling like an outsider, and was probably closer to 10 years. In that time, God did not tell us things, in the early days, God did not tell us things like, invest in this community, get involved, it will ensure your well-being. But gradually we did. But the first few years were mostly about us receiving and learning. And our gracious hosts did that faithfully. Some folk taught us how to recycle, others told us where to shop, farmers market, how to use a drive-through bank. People introduced us to more people who introduced us to other people. And even though we had a sense that we'd been sent by God, there was still very real challenges that lay in our paths, and things went wrong. One of the first things was like within the second year, our money for the equity loan money for our house in Australia was in Australian dollars, and the Australian dollar plunged something like 25%. Suddenly we had lost a couple of years of living. We also made poor decisions in those early days, like buying really cheap cars that cost a lot of money in the long run. We took to the American experience of eating out all the time and spent too much at steakhouses. And we bought far too many books because they were so much cheaper than home. But gradually, we, like other migrants and refugees, adapted and came on to be contributing members of this society that has given us so much. God kept coming to us in each moment, in each crisis, in each experience of graciousness. Following seminary, I came to work at St. Bart's 18 years ago. Who would have imagined that all this lay ahead of me? On the other side of that dark abyss 30 years ago. The Jewish exiles, they could not have imagined God's words leading them into meaningful lives, so much so that their children did not want to return, their grandchildren did not want to return when it was time to Jerusalem. I'm thinking part of the reason this story is emerged for today is because my leaving is connected to my coming. And it is only now I can look back, that we all can look back. The beginning starts with the ending, and the ending the beginning. In the gospel reading that brackets the end of the readings for today, it's the foreigner out of the 10 lepers who turned around and moved towards Jesus and said, "Thank you." The gospel writer tells us that he was made well, which in it is a sense of making whole, body, mind, spirit, whole, not just a cure of his leprosy. He had entered into a relationship with the Christ. So the invitation, I think, for us over this next 6 weeks is to turn around and back towards that faithful God and say thank you. And thank you. Say thanks to one another, to remember the stories of how we came to this place of joined for a period of time, and it's time for a new time. I hope you join me in this task of remembering and giving thanks.